We live in an era of catastrophic climate change during an era of late-stage capitalism where we see a convergence of state and corporate power towards a paradigm of domination over others, period. Okay, that's the concern. Yeah, so my name is Danielle Chenoweth. I'm the Cunningham Township Supervisor. My background is various. I'm a long-time community organizer, run a lot of political and social campaigns in my tenure. I've started a number of nonprofits. I've worked in government as I am now. I served on city council for several years. I ran a business, a tech company in downtown for 15 years. And I used to work in Congress passing legislation for about 10 years before I became supervisor. So.
Excellent.
Every single day, in so many different ways, I see people supporting each other through mutual aid structures, through government offices like ourselves, through nonprofits, through grassroots organizations. We actually, as humans, we are social beings and we live in community. That is actually who we are. Compared to the rest of the country, our income has been lower, but the rents has also been lower. I think in the last few years, we're really seeing that issue come home to Champaign-Urbana, and we're seeing significant increases in housing costs. Part of that is driven by the university enrolling more students without having a plan for housing them, which creates pressures in the local community and kind of pushes local residents out of housing. And part of it is just the market. We're seeing across the whole country the price of housing go up, and an income is not keeping up with rents. So we're lucky in Illinois because we did pass a kind of a fair wage, tiered fair wage, and we're now up to $15 an hour compared to the rest of the country. That's good. But there's still a gap. And as a result, in Urbana, pre-pandemic, we had 2/3 of renters were rent burdened, compared to the national statistic of 50%. And so Champaign County is a place where typically to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, a person needs to work 2 jobs. And that's what it comes down to. And so to work 2 jobs as a single parent and also take care of children, it starts really becoming overwhelming and impossible. And that's why we see when we have an opening of the housing authority wait list for housing vouchers, we might have 5,000 to 10,000 families apply for 1,000 slots on a wait list. The housing policy looks a lot like the country. There was redlining in the community, there was segregation. The first African American students at the university couldn't live on campus. They had to live essentially with families north of University Avenue. It's still a practice that it's difficult for African American residents to walk to campus and not be stopped by the police. I still hear reports of that. So there are kind of these invisible zones of where you're supposed to go and not go. I had a housemate who was African American in West Urbana, and he was stopped regularly by the police asking him where he was going because he was in a mostly white neighborhood. So segregation, even though it's not written into the policies in the same way, is still alive and well in the community. And so I think that informs, when you come to town, real estate agents, still steer people to the neighborhoods where they think is appropriate for those spaces. West Urbana neighborhood ordinance says that they really are supposed to be educating, enforcing, potentially fining. It allows them to do testing for discrimination, which is a very valid and useful way to find discrimination. And instead, they really just wait for folks to report discrimination. And when that discrimination is reported, it's not always taken seriously. So, for example, I have a case manager who went with a participant to the city of Urbana this last fall, reported discrimination based on felony conviction status, and essentially was turned away without being able to file a report. So, housing discrimination is really racial discrimination by another name. In many cases, it shows up as we only rent to students. We are student housing. How many kids do you have in your family? We don't take vouchers. We don't work with the housing authority. We don't allow people to inspect our properties. Of course, if you're in Urbana, you can't rent without having an inspection, so that's not true. So those are some of the very, very frequent policies that our participants face. So first off, we don't have enough vouchers. If you're lucky enough to get a voucher, then you have to find someone to rent to you. If you say you have a voucher, they might not even show you the place or talk to you, right? They'll ask you if you have a voucher, and if you say yes and tell the truth, then they'll discriminate against you. If you say no, then you've lied on your application. And so then that voucher has a time period, and if you don't use that voucher within that time period, which is usually 3 months, essentially you lose that voucher and then you have to start over, and that can be many, many years if ever you get a chance to apply for a voucher again and get on. College student housing, because all housing is open to everyone. Unless it's certified student housing, it's not student housing, right? But we do need housing that is close to the university, not for students, for faculty, for staff, for part-time workers and seasonal workers, for the people who clean up at night, for the people who serve the food, for everyone. The university is a major economic source, and so having housing that's close by the university really benefits everyone. We have a relatively small number of folks who are street homeless. And the primary things that they are dealing with is either being on a fixed income or a senior, so they're income limited. You'll see between seniors and people with disabilities, those staying at the local shelter, the seniors and people with disabilities make up over half. You also have folks at the shelter who are working regularly where the wage is not enough for them to move out of housing. So, but I also want to say that there's a whole other invisible face of homelessness, and that's homeless women, homeless families with children. We have seen it nationwide. Nationwide, we've seen an 18% increase in homelessness in 2024. And a 37% increase in family homelessness in 2024 nationwide. And I think that pretty much that represents what we've seen here locally at Township as well. Significant increase in homeless families. So when we talk about empty units, we're talking about working moms or working dads with children who might be working at Carl or doing overnight security, who might be working in food service, who are working full-time and can't get into housing. Maybe they have poor credit, maybe there was an eviction from years ago, or post-pandemic when everyone was, had lost so much income. Some evictions were sealed, but then there was a wave of evictions after that. So, when we talk about there being folks who are homeless, the largest homeless population in our community are totally invisible because they're doubled up homeless. They're moving from place to place. They're in attics or basements. And that homeless population as well is something that, the market is not solving a problem for them. There are plenty of units, but they can't access them. And that is due to discrimination as well as the price of the units. Yeah, if you met my team. I've got an amazing team here. We at Cunningham Township have a team of about 20 folks. We have licensed social workers. We have folks who are in school to become social workers. We have interns from the School of Social Work, 2 interns this semester. We appreciate the internship program. We have advocates and case managers who have 20 and 25 years experience, but maybe we're not able to get the license, go through the schooling process and get the licensure. And I would say our team really engages with participants, our program participants, from a framework of love and care, and not only paperwork and processing of humans. And certainly it's important to hold, good boundaries and to model boundaries for participants, many of whom have been victims of violence where they were not allowed to have bodily autonomy and did not have boundaries. So actually social workers modeling boundaries can be really helpful for participants to learn boundaries. We went into this winter with dozens and dozens of people outside with no room for them. This team, Cunningham Township, we added about 80 beds of winter shelter in stages. And each day we check to make sure that there's no turnaways at the shelter. So it's not, I'm not interested in forever providing homeless services on a shoestring budget with overtime staff working overtime, but it gives me hope. And I'll tell you, the staff that are working overtime right now at Cunningham Township, I check in with them all the time because I'm always worried. I was like, how are you doing? I'm doing great because we can actually put people in housing and I don't have to leave them on the street. So I'm fine. And I'm like, okay, let's make sure we build it in your, vacation time. Let's make you sure, and of course I've staffed up. I brought on contractors. I have a lot of help. But, so what gives me hope is that people are willing to do the work. One of the strategies is to help to empower those with the lived experience of poverty to have a voice and choice in the political and social processes and cultural processes. It's not only voting, which is absolutely essential, but it's participating in the conversation, having a place at the table, claiming a place at the table, and it's about being seen and heard. It's about the stories that are told. The stories in this community, the toxic stories that are told are, those people are coming from Chicago, they're not from here, or from St. Louis, they're not from here. And the other story is if we build it, they will come and we don't want them. There's other toxic stories about, how this person, basically has, I think the News Gazette at one point had a headline called "A Culture of Deprivation," a culture, a depraved culture. So there's this toxic storytelling about the poor, and I don't think any amount of advocacy truly changes that until poor people are able to say no more. You're not going to do that. That's not who we are. Here's who we are, and here's what we want. And that to address people's housing needs is fundamental to supporting their education needs, their healthcare needs, their mental health needs, etc. So the first and foremost is, can we stake out housing as a human right and as a human necessity and something that, really is, it's not an optional item, and it cannot only live within the market economy because the market economy has failed us so badly. I think our housing authority is fantastic. It's innovative, it's visionary. Their Move to Work program, which provides them a certain amount of flexibility on how to develop programs, and they have really leaned in they support a lot of families and individuals in the community. There are hundreds and hundreds of senior citizens, people with disabilities, and families with children who, wouldn't be able to survive without the housing authority. So how do we continue to grow the HUD budget and provide for those subsidies is really important. I started as a 28-year-old as a city council member. I watched the council had one way they were going to vote. Residents showed up, including students. They gave testimony, and the council would vote differently because of that input. They would slow things down. They would stop and consider, or sometimes they'd frankly switch their vote. It's really more about making sure that we remove the barriers to that, because just like you scatter seeds on the ground and they're going to grow, as long as somebody's not trampling on them, so too do I think we build community and we build social networks all the time.
Director of MTW, which stands for Move to Work at the Housing Authority of Champaign County. Move to Work is actually a HUD designation that allows us to create innovative policies and activities and strategies that help our local community when it comes to housing. We work with the low and extremely low income populations, but with our programs and resources, we are able to help them become economically self-sufficient, where eventually they can live off of the program. And so to be able to help these families become thriving citizens in our community is very rewarding. My personal opinion is it hasn't changed very much in the grand scheme of things. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of racial segregation, socioeconomic segregation, and there's not a lot of opportunity for those who want better circumstances to have those. And one big difference, though, I believe, some of the policies have changed on paper, so it's not as obvious of the discrimination that goes on. It's more covert instead, but it still plagues certain vulnerable populations in Champaign County. Like the 1940s, it was written on paper. One example would be Ellis Drive and certain housing complexes. They actually had written clauses in some of their deeds and development paperwork that said that only black people could live here, or they could not move out of these areas, or certain developments where minorities weren't allowed to live here. And so that was just the way it was. But now, even though they can't say you can discriminate based on income, ethnicity, race, it's still done based on the person that's reviewing the paperwork. The first one that came to mind was the Great Migration. So with the Great Migration, a lot of African Americans moved from the rural South to move north. They wanted economic opportunities, they wanted to get their education, and of course we had Jim Crow going on at that time. So they're escaping to live, a better and free life. And with the railroad system advancing at that time also, as we can see, Champaign is a hub for traveling, not only for the manufacturing industry, shipping things, but also for travel. So Champaign became a hub where a lot of people were traveling to the major cities like Chicago, and Champaign was a stopping point. So during that time, we had an influx of black people that ended up staying in Champaign County area due to the access. But as a result of that, they were kind of segregated until what is called the North End, and it's still referred to the North End this day, and that's the area north of University. So we had the railroad tracks running through this complex that we're at now, with trays, And this is a predominantly African American community. Definitely the minority population. We can also put in the low-income population. And unfortunately, that low income disproportionately affects the minorities based on lack of opportunities that others are afforded. We can also include the elderly now. We have a growing elderly population, so affordability always comes back to that. You know, they're on fixed incomes, and the way the rents are continually to rise is not affordable for them either. And I would also include individuals with disability. Authority Champaign County, we work with a lot of wonderful agencies in the county that are all in the fight to prevent homelessness, to keep people housed, and to help them find affordable housing. Some of the agencies we work closely with is the Cunningham Township Supervisor's Office. We work with Champaign Township. We have partnerships with See You at Home, Strides. I know even First College and Recovery have housing programs for those who were formerly incarcerated, but that's another population that often gets overlooked. Sometimes they are discriminated against because of their criminal background when it comes to housing. We work with Carl Hospital and their Healthy Beginnings program, RPC, well, the Regional Planning Commission of Champaign County. I could go on and on. Champaign County Home Visiting Consortium, you know, they work directly with families, and when they see a need, we work with them. Trauma Resilience Initiative here. Those are a few, but I think one main thing is the CSPH. Another organization is the Continuum of Care, which is ran through the Regional Planning Commission, and they're an organization that comprises of a lot of organizations locally that come together, you know, once a month to meet regarding housing issues in the community. With the Housing Authority of Champaign County being a move-to-work agency and being allowed to create innovative policies that address the needs of our community, we have implemented policies and activities to help improve housing conditions locally. And some of those include raising our payment standards. With the rent increasing every year, normal policy through our federal government is that we can only pay up to 110% of what that area market rent is. However, with us being a move-to-work agency, we're able to raise that standard. So with the rise in rent costs, we recently raised our standards up to 120% to meet that demand. And every year we have the opportunity to increase that if necessary. Additionally, we are going to be implementing what's called a mobility voucher program, where those vouchers will be increased to 150% of the payment standard. And that will allow them to live in those more high opportunity areas, you know, where the income is greater. Obviously the rents are going to be significantly higher, but it'll give our families the opportunity to live in an area that is safe and accessible to the things that they need, such as grocery stores, schools that are performing well, and employment. Locally, get involved. Get involved with the Continuum of Care. Like I said, we hold monthly meetings that you can attend. The Housing Authority, either the Housing Authority of Champaign County, or if you have a local housing authority where you live, find out what programs are they offering. Go to their board meetings, see what they are doing to improve the housing crisis in their areas. And one thing you can always do is speak to the people. You know, see what their needs are, and see what you can do to advocate for them. I believe that some of the cities can implement policy around corporate greed, who can purchase these units, especially after COVID with the moratorium on rent. A lot of landlords sold their properties because they didn't want to handle they lost a lot of money during that time, unfortunately. And that was a sign that a lot of landlords decided not to stay in that line of work. So we have corporations from New York, California, who are owning our properties that are being neglected, and nothing can be done about it. And so I think there should be some policies in place regarding ownership. I think there should be more diligent policies in place that require units to be at a certain standard. Some units get past.
So here we're standing out of Oakwood Trace Townhomes. This is one of the Housing Authority of Champaign County's developments. Here we have 50 units, family units, multifamily units. So our units here, there's 50 that are between 2 and 4 bedroom units for people with a project-based voucher. And what differentiates project-based vouchers from what we call our tenant-based vouchers, or what people know them as Section 8, is that housing assistance is just specifically for this development. And some kind of historical context when it comes to these affordable housing developments is the fact that they start off as housing development projects. So a lot of people say, oh, you live in the projects when you live in low-income housing, and that's kind of where it comes from. And so with our tenant-based voucher, Section 8, you're allowed to use that voucher anywhere in Champaign County, which gives you more flexibility to choose the area that you want to live in. And as we discussed with, racial segregation when it comes to housing, as this is what is considered the north end of Champaign. And like we said, here we are outside of Oakwood Trace Apartments. Right in front of us, there's another complex, which is Bristol Place, which is also affordable housing. And behind us, we have Douglas Square. And Douglas Square is another 50-unit complex for individuals with project-based vouchers. So as you can see, a lot of Black people or low-income people are kind of segregated in this specific area of Champaign. And to my right, behind me, is Love Corner Church, and this area actually is affectionately called the Love Corner because of the church's presence in this neighborhood. And historically, the church is very important in the African American community. Due to slavery and family getting split up and lost, the family was tight-knit, but also community was tight-knit to help with resources and to provide for each other through difficult times. And the church was also a definite cornerstone in the Black community. And if you go in many Black neighborhoods around the country, you will see churches on every corner. So here we have Love Corner in this North End neighborhood. And again, African Americans resided in this area due to the railroad system as it grew back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And so when our African Americans from the rural South started migrating to the north, Champaign was one of the stops along the way.